I'm sure that you find these hours in the morning sessions to be of great interest and carry considerable weight. You can easily associate yourselves with what it is that is occurring. This morning, I know you were impressed, as I was, with Joe's handling of the interview. Evidently, the question related to Joe as a person rather than to some disembodied emissary ministry. In actual fact, this is the way that anything should be handled. I don't think any of you would have sufficient gall, to put it this way, to say that you actually can speak for the emissaries. You might be able to describe the articles in the Constitution, but to speak for the emissaries, you must speak for yourself. There is no other way to do it. If you are maneuvered into a position which separates you from the emissaries, obviously you can't speak for them. One must speak always from one's own personal experience, and don't try to invent ideas as to what the emissary, the disembodied emissary, whatever that is, would stand for. You don't know that. Nobody knows that. I don't know it. One speaks for the whole when one speaks in the expression of the truth of oneself. There's no other way to do it. You can't speak for the whole second-hand. All you can do second-hand is to voice an opinion. Well, is your opinion going to be better than somebody else's opinion? Maybe the opinion of the interviewer. They're all opinions, after all. So it's most important that one should see that whenever one is exposed in this way to the public, that one is speaking for oneself. And don't try to duck out by describing the emissaries, whatever that is. That's something you don't know. If you have to describe something in that way, it's something you don't know, but you do know your own experience. And the only basis you have for saying anything that means anything is your own experience. I would suggest that while there may be occasions when the matter of the emissaries is prominent in the consciousness of the interviewer, one should do what is necessary to disillusion him, because he has an illusion that you can speak for the emissaries. You can't. You can speak for yourself, and if you speak out of the truth of yourself, you are speaking as an emissary. And so you know, you're speaking about what you know. and not speculating as to what I know, for instance, equating that with the emissary policy. Forget it. You know what you know. Speak of that. And shut up about the rest. Because there are enough opinions in the world as it is. Now, when Ross was questioned about the emissaries without any recognition of his association with them, he could say something from his own experience that was no longer an opinion. It was the fact. Of course, probably the person to whom he was speaking would take it as an opinion, because he didn't recognize the possibility that Ross knew the truth of it. If we see this with respect to public interviews, we may see it also with respect to all our affairs, all our associations with others, even with fellow emissaries. We must speak from what we know. My goodness, how conversation would be restricted on this basis. Because how much emissary chatter is based in speculation, in opinion. I heard. Did you hear that? Who cares what you heard? What do you know? And there is so much of this dissipation of spiritual substance by mouthing of opinions and by what obviously is gossip. Why is it that when a person becomes involved with that sort of a thing, he doesn't recognize what it is and just keeps going? Well, I don't want to offend so-and-so. Why not? Are we hesitant to offend human nature? Not amongst ourselves, surely. The Lord rebuke thee. So, obviously, if we are not capable of functioning from the standpoint of the truth of ourselves and our everyday experience, then when we're put on TV, we're not going to do it. That's going to be a tougher situation to handle. If we haven't handled the easy one, how are we going to handle a tougher one? The easy one is right there in front of us, moment by moment, in the humdrum affairs of living. We need to be very cautious about putting ourselves on the public spot until we're very sure that we have taken care of all that is necessary in the private spot. Then there will be no difference between the private spot and the public one. Otherwise, we immediately find ourselves out of our depth in the public one, because we have no adequate substance. Now, these things may not particularly be so very true of you yet, although I suspect that there are elements that relate. But we see these things as being very particularly true of many who are associated with the emissary ministry, whatever that is, We don't really know what it is, do we, until we are emissaries ourselves, which means that we are revealing in spiritual expression the truth of ourselves consistently. Then we know. Then we know that it isn't bound up in forms of human construction. There is a form involved, brought forth by spiritual expression. The form which we have described in various ways, the emissary ministry is that form, really, or the body of the archangel, whatever. Here is a form. Rather an ethereal form in many ways thus far. This is not to say that there are not some physical bodies around, fairly solid, apparently. But how much are those physical bodies really revealing the form of the body of the archangel? Obviously, there are, what is it now? I don't know, over 4 billion anyway, human bodies around on Earth. And yet, the body of the archangel is not particularly made evident by reason of this fact. So it's quite possible to have a physical body and be a part of humanity and not reveal the body of the archangel. So there's something more to it merely than the fact that we have physical bodies and call ourselves emissaries. The body of the archangel is something more than that. Something which is not discernible from the usual standpoint of the human nature approach. It may be sensed, perhaps, but the body of the archangel is intended to be something very easily discernible. There was no difficulty in recognizing the body of Jesus when he was on earth. There it was. Most did not recognize it as the body of the Son of God in that individual sense. Nevertheless, it was. And it was quite solid, as solid as anyone else's body. So it's not merely having physical bodies and calling ourselves emissaries that achieves anything very much. It is the fact that there is a blending into the spirit of the archangel in the collective sense, or the angelic spirit in the individual sense. And there's no possibility of blending into that spirit without the essential substance. I noticed in the video this morning, and I think yesterday, I spoke of this in terms of concentric spheres of substance in order to awaken something more into experience. If we see this substance in terms of various dimensional levels, we also recognize the distinction between the dimensional levels of the earth and the dimensional levels of the heaven. It's all one substance, but there is a vibrational transition between the coarser substance of the earth and the finer substance of the heaven. We also are aware of the part that the the heart plays in the substance which connects heaven and earth. This connecting substance of the fourth level permits the blending of the heaven and the earth. It either permits that blending in one's experience or prevents it. We understand why this blending has been prevented, and we see our responsibility in letting the changed operation of the heart permit the blending to occur. Actually, Joe was speaking about that in his interview, which the interviewer steadfastly insisted upon not seeing. Of course, because he was anxious to prove Joe to be a phony, and that what he was describing was just talk. So he was seeking to get under Joe's skin some way, which he didn't succeed in doing, and that was very frustrating to him. Well, let human nature be frustrated. This is why I say that in any interview of this nature, you need to be the thing about which you are speaking. If you're not, a wedge will be driven in between and it'll become quite obvious. That is no service to anyone. I don't think any of us would be too anxious to reveal that we were phonies. Of course, if we are, we keep doing it anyway, but we don't realize for the most part that we are doing it. So this heart substance provides properly the means by which heaven and earth blend in our experience. This is all in our experience, because it is the nature of the heart in us that tells the tale. It doesn't establish anything from the standpoint of God. The reality is real anyway, regardless of how we behave. But in our experience, we don't know anything about it until we behave the way we were created to behave. And that requires a pure heart. That requires that we are not governed by the crayons on the wall or the crunch on the car. By the way, that's worked out very well for Joe in this instance, because he not only equaled what the fellow had described, but went one better, or 100 better. Certain amount of one-upmanship in this. That if you have an example that really is a crunch of that nature, use it. While the interviewer, of course, his trade is to be brash, so he was able to come back, but it certainly took the wind out of his sails and made him the more desperate. So we need to have the examples in our own experience. If, because a gravel truck landed on Joe's station wagon, he had become involved in a great deal of emotional stress, he wouldn't have had anything to offer on the program, would he? It's only because he proved something out in that area that he had something to tell the interviewer. Well, we need to see that in relationship to our own experience. When we do have the experience, then we have the substance of blending. The blending of heaven and earth. Now, this matter of blending relates to union, doesn't it? Now, the union of heaven and earth is made possible by reason of the fact that there is also union between the dimensional and the undimensional. One might say there are two aspects of union here. I suppose these could be correlated with the words resurrection and ascension. Richard's comment about sun substance is valid, of course. There is a process of resurrection, in other words, a transformation of earthly substance, the generation out of earthly substance of heavenly substance. But then there is a transmutation of all this from the dimensional level into the undimensional, and that's something else. If I mention it here, I do not mention it in order that we might start speculating about it, but merely to indicate that there are elements within this creative process of which presently we have virtually no experience. Now, when there are such elements which need to be touched on so as to open a door, then it is important that we do not become involved in speculating about something that we don't know. We move into the unknown from the known, therefore there has to be the awareness that the unknown is there to move into. But let us await the time of movement. Now, when it comes to answering questions, we very well know that the real answer to a question that may be posed out of human nature cannot be given. The only thing that can be given, well, it could be given but not understood. The only thing that could be given and understood is something that relates to human nature. I suppose one could say that one could only answer a question and provide the real answer when the individual was ready for it. Now, probably this isn't the way it should be approached in an interview. Therefore, what is necessary is for the individual to get ready for it. Not to hear the answer, but to get ready to hear it. And this requires something of most people who ask questions which they're not ready to give. When you are ready to hear the answer to that question, I will give it. But in order to hear the answer when given, you will have to be ready for it. And that requires something of you. So we see this in terms of substance. If the substance is not there, if the the heart is impure, very little can be done. In any case, what needs to be done is not done merely by answering questions. So we wish to be sure that we ourselves are ready to answer the question when the other person is ready to hear the answer. This requires the generation of substance and the clarifying of this connecting substance of the heart, so that heaven and earth may be one in our experience. If heaven and earth are one in our experience, we recognize the dominance of heaven. The weight is in heaven. The treasure is in heaven. The earth is there, but the treasure is in heaven. And the earth only has meaning by reason of the heaven. In a sense, the heaven has meaning by reason of the earth, but in a different way. There is rightly a blending between heaven and earth, between the substance above and the substance below. That blending is made possible by the substance in between. The substance, the heavenly substance, is essential to earthly understanding. If that substance isn't adequately there, or it cannot adequately be experienced at the earthly level because of the cloudiness of the veil in between, the heart in between, then it's impossible to know the truth. Now, of course, you cannot say that to people and have them understand what you're talking about. But we understand. This blending, then, the substance of blending is important. The clarity of heart. When we speak of blending, we're speaking of union, and we're speaking of sex in rather a particular sense. It is impossible to approach an understanding of the reality indicated by the word sex without having the substance of blending clear the way it should be. Otherwise, we are trapped below the veil, and everything that is done will prove to be destructive in one way or another. Most people think of sex in terms of physical attraction. Being emissaries, of course, we recognize that that's a very restricted view. Or do we? Physical attraction is the least important element insofar as the reality of sex is concerned. And yet, generally speaking, this is what is emphasized in the consciousness of those who are considering becoming involved in sexual experience. I suppose, as a general rule, if one can generalize such things, it may be said to be wise that if there is physical attraction, set it to one side. Because even if there is something more than that, if the physical attraction dominates, the individual will likely never discover what more there is. It will be hidden and disintegrated by whatever works out at that physical level. So that later, when that isn't dominant anymore, there will seem to be a blank. And that blank may not be a valid blank. In other words, it is a blank that was produced by the wrong function in the initial stages of this physical attraction. Then that destroyed the spiritual substance that might otherwise have been present. So, there should be a clear awareness on our part that physical attraction is not the first thing. Anyone who has assumed spiritual responsibility will have experienced physical attraction along the way. But if he is capable of assuming spiritual responsibility, that will have been set aside. In other words, it will not have been the dominant thing. It's not the important thing at all. We need to see this relative to others. So that we can handle the situation rightly. But if we had to handle it rightly, we must have handled it rightly in ourselves first. Otherwise we say, come back next week. I haven't yet stopped eating candy. But we better make use of the week in between. True blending occurs within the individual to the extent that the heart is pure. That is the blending of heaven and earth. The blending of heaven and earth is also the blending of the dimensional person with the undimensional person. So that the angel then has what is necessary to be revealed in expression on earth to do the job that needs to be done. Now, obviously, all this requires experience, not something that is merely known because I talk about it now, for instance. I talk about it now and can talk about it now because you have some experience in this regard. It means something to you. During the session with Grace this morning, you were considering this matter of hearing and doing in connection with the parable about the house built upon the rock or the house built upon the sand. There's only one difference between the two being described. Both heard, but only one did. And it was the doing that proved the important factor, not the hearing. Lots of people hear something. But it is the doing that permits the standing, that permits the stability, and the consequent generation of substance, allowing for the release of power. Now, this generation takes place individually. We each individually have responsibility for what it is describable in terms of concentric spheres. As there is a moving into the finer substance of heaven because it has been generated, there is made available the facility of blending with others. The blending takes place at the level of heaven, rightly. When we find our relationships with others. If we short-circuit the business simply by finding a relationship in hell or in the earth by itself, that's hell, then we can never know what blending is. We can never know what the truth is. Well, to know that truth, one has to experience the blending in oneself. Then it is possible to participate in a blending of relationship with others. When I say that, I'm not talking about intimate blendings necessarily. There are all kinds of blendings that take place. We have all kinds of relationships, obviously. And let's not immediately sort of narrow it down to one supreme relationship that's going to appear. It will never appear on that basis. If it is right that a relationship of that sort should appear. And don't jump to conclusions in this regard. Don't assume that this is the be-all and end-all of your experience. It isn't. It may be a useful element for the achievement of what needs to be done while you're here on earth. This, incidentally, tends to dispose of the concept that many have had of the eternal nature of relationships, humanly established. The Mormon Church goes for this particularly. We'll get you so closely married to your mate that it will last forever. I wonder if anyone would really wish that to happen. I think it would get a little boring after a while. Let's not superimpose any human concepts on the truth, but let us discover rather what the truth is. There is this substance of heaven, life substance, womb substance, and love substance. Of course, it could be said that it is all love substance. Just love substance at different levels of vibratory manifestation. There is no other substance but the substance of love in actual fact. But when we come to the level of the pure love substance, while in a sense it may be seen as one's outermost sphere of substance, it isn't quite so containable as that. After all, love substance is all the substance there is, so it's every place in the dimensional universe. It is difficult to find analogies to describe what happens. Of course, here is something of a seventh dimension, and we haven't probably even got beyond the second. But it is this love substance which is found to be common to all of the groupings that we may be considering, all the patterns of relationship. This grouping we have here becomes a blended body by reason of this love substance which we share. We cannot really make claims for it as our own. It is our own, it's a part of what we are, but we can't restrict it to that. It is shared by all of us together. In fact, we discover that this heavenly substance is what is shared. It is here that the blending takes place. And that blending then in heaven is made evident on earth because of the pure heart. So that the blending in heaven then emerges as a blending on earth. A blending of whatever the particular grouping may be for the particular purpose. Rightly, of course, we may see that there is an overall blending which includes mankind. And all other groupings are contained within that. Right down to the one-to-one relationship. In this way, we begin to see that all relationships, rightly, are made in heaven. In other words, they emerge out of the fact that there has been a blending in heaven of whatever nature and quality that might be. And let us certainly not assume that a blending in heaven is all of one consistency. It isn't. Clearly, we have all kinds of relationships with people, rightly so. And they do not all emerge in the earthly sense on some sort of physically intimate basis. They do not. The emissary structured state of consciousness has been established in this field, as in every other, by an attempt to understand what it is working from below. Well, we're going to get this so that we know it by establishing some sort of a relationship at the physical level, and then the levels spill over into the other levels. But that's not the way it works. We're concerned, after all, are we not, with something coming down from God out of heaven? Not with trying to satisfy ourselves with the available material on earth. That is what caused the fall in the first place. We're not trying to get satisfaction anyway, even spiritual satisfaction. We are concerned to participate in the creative process which brings with it blending, union, oneness. And we're not going to try to impose human ideas about that on the truth. At least I trust we're not. I'm not interested, I know. I'd like to know what the truth is. And we have to find that out in our experience moment by moment. We can't say at any given moment, at last, I've got it. Here's the truth. Now I know the truth. You know the truth? Possibly. Unlikely at the moment. You know the truth for this moment. But you don't know it yet for what it will be tomorrow, or what it will be 1 second from the present moment. The truth is not so little that it could be encompassed by our minds in one moment. I think that if we have any awareness of the real nature of truth, we would see that that would explode and shatter the mind instantly. Because the truth is of eternity. It takes eternity to know the truth. We wouldn't want to try to encompass that in a moment, would we? Ridiculous. But there is the truth of the moment, and that can find expression, not encompassed entirely by our minds, but our minds will be part of the means by which this truth is allowed to emerge into expression in the dimensional world. So we are concerned with allowing the heart to be purified, and while this is in motion, the purification process is going on, there is a generation of the essential substance which will fill out the vibratory levels of heaven in our own personal experience. This is the first order of business. It's an individual thing. But we see that as this begins to fill out the heaven, we find that we are, in fact, connected. There is a blending which will occur in consequence at the heavenly level. How that manifests in the earthly sense remains to be seen. How it manifests individually speaking, and how it manifests in whatever grouping, such as this assembly, may be the fact of the moment. As I say, there is a recognition of the ultimate experience of this blending insofar as the whole of humanity is concerned, and that is the restoration. So we are concerned with the experience ourselves so that we can function on the basis of the truth we know. And it is that is spiritual expression. Then there is the generation of power in the collective sense, by which generation of power, because the substance has been generated to release it, by which we may do what we're here to do. Now we can hear about these things as we are this morning, but there is the doing, of course, required. If there is to be that stable point of orientation, that stable means by which whatever next needs to be done can be done. Now, I'm not saying that what is being experienced now is merely a matter of hearing. I'm sure it isn't. There's something more than the hearing occurring in your own experience, because you correlate these things with your own experience. And I trust that you are not imagining, even though some of you may be writing a few notes, that you are going to take those notes and lay the trip on somebody else, because those notes will be found to be utterly worthless. It is what you are doing, what your experience is, that counts in the moment. The extent to which the heart is being purified and the extent to which the heavenly substance is being generated. And so here we begin to find the means by which we may handle our individual and collective fields of responsibility, remembering always that our individual fields of responsibility are not isolated from the larger fields of responsibility, so that we can never take the attitude that anything we do is our business alone. There are some things which are mostly our own individual business. There are other things we do which are mostly a collective business, and there are all gradations in between. But we never come to a point where anything we do is solely our business. If that was so, we would have removed ourselves entirely from the whole, and our only meaning is in the whole. So we never have a sense of isolation then. If we have a sense of isolation, it is because we ourselves remove ourselves from the whole. No one ever imposes upon us isolation. Even though you may be in a situation, what was it called, sent to Coventry, nobody will speak to you. This is intended to cause you to feel terrible. My, I would feel rather delighted. Well, it depends on the point of view, I suppose. A peaceful spot at last. But if a person hasn't found anything in relationship to himself, then it may be a tiresome experience to be isolated externally. You only find that to be a terrible thing if you have no internal connections. But if the internal connections are there, and here is the weight, the value, the meaning, well, it's a very little thing that something happens externally to make you feel uncomfortable. You are still associated with all that is. And what human nature may be doing around you is merely providing you with your field of action so that you wouldn't be governed by your emotional disturbance with respect to what was happening. You'd be using it to advantage. Or I say that my attitude might be of thankfulness in that situation. I trust I would also have thankfulness in a situation where people were talking. And we need to have this. It's not the situation that makes the difference. If one is oneself. So we have the greater opportunity then of experiencing union without laying on it any human designs, by interpreting what we feel in human terms. Aha, this is wonderful. I feel something tremendous with this person. Most of what is felt tremendously between human beings is just a physical reaction of some kind. One might almost call it a chemical reaction of some kind, which completely obliterates the consciousness one may have had before of the truth, the heavenly truth, reflected in the substance of heaven. Because all the attention comes down here then. And this tremendous thing that is happening. Wait a minute. If anything grabs you so strongly in the external sense, it is suspect immediately. Now this goes contrary, of course, to all the romantic views of human beings, but then we're not averse to that, are we? Human nature is not to be pandered to. Our concern is to be one with the truth, and out of that springs all that rightly should spring. Many proper relationships of every hue and description. In such a state, there could be no sense of isolation, even externally. So our concern is to let this emerge to the glory of God within the range of our own increasing experience. Letting substance be generated because our hearts are pure, and we're not constantly involved in all these things out here. This is not to say that we are not alert or observant with respect to external things. After all, this is our creative field, where we're going to have to handle things the way they should be handled, so we need to know what's there. But we don't take what's there and jump into the middle of it and just be merely something else that's there. We need to be here and let that be there. Then we can deal with it on the basis of the generation of the substance of heaven because of purity of heart.
Martin, we recognize that our first relationship is our relationship with you. And we know that we can trust that totally and offer ourselves into that freely. And that as we do that, then actually everything else comes into balance and is in proper perspective. So it's a joy to speak on behalf of, I know, everyone here, to say that we know where